Good morning. Good morning, everybody. And welcome our very distinguished guest, Katherine, who has written this incredible book, Conscious Uncoupling, and she's going to talk to us this morning about that. So let me begin by welcoming you. And Katherine said that she was so happy to get this invitation because she already sees herself as an architect of change. So let me just begin, Katherine, by asking you, what does that mean to you to be an architect of change?
I think it's the organizing principle of my life, actually. And I think that those of us who are born at this time, this precious, critical time in history, on a soul level, came in volunteering to be architects of change. And it is my goal in life that future generations will look back and say, you know, those women and those men, they kicked it. You know, they knocked it out of the ballpark.
But how do you define it? Because so many people that write for mariashriver.com or who might be here say, well, that's fine for Katherine to think of herself as an architect of change. She wrote a book, but I haven't written a book. I'm not running a company.
Right.
Why am I an architect of change?
So let me give you an example. I went to the women's conference. I told you this before. I went 7 years ago, and I sat in an audience of 14,000 people, and I turned to my friend who I went with, and I said, I'm going to be on that stage with Maria.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about being an architect, this is how you know that you're an architect of change, because I didn't ever then run around, like following you around, knocking on your door, writing you letters every week, sending you my book. What I did is I asked myself, who would I need to be worthy on sharing the stage with Maria?
Oh, wow.
And what would I need to create of merit in this world that would have Maria call me? And I have to tell you, I'd actually kind of forgotten, like I got very involved in that pursuit and kind of forgot the promise that I made to my friend, which she reminded me of when you invited me here.
Oh, that's so fun.
But I have to tell you that when you wrote to me, because I didn't send my book in to Maria, and you can imagine what a privileged seat this is up here. And when you wrote to me, I literally burst out in tears.
Oh, wow.
Because it meant so much to me. So I think, you know, I like to just remind people, you know, I'm fortunate I went on the New York Times bestseller list. I've had the privilege of teaching thousands of people in my career. But I'm just a person who was going through a lot of hard times in my life. And I think the primary definition for me of being an architect of change is that we make the choice to take everything ugly and everything disappointing and everything, you know, that's broken and find a way to make it beautiful for ourselves and for others.
Beautiful explanation, Katherine. Thank you so much for that. And Katherine, as we know, has written this book. And what I really liked about it is that in the beginning of the book, it says, if you have the courage to rise and take on heartache for all it's worth, then this book is for you. If you're willing to use the pain you're in to flesh out the falsehoods you've been tolerating too long, this book is for you. If you will use this setback as an opportunity to liberate yourself from the many ways you have been dimming yourself down, showing up less than who you are in life, it's for you. And then you go on and go on. And you say, this is a book for all who love you and who you love as well. Why is this so important to understand, whether you are in the midst of breaking up a relationship, whether you have a child who is, whether you want to break up a friendship? Why is this so important?
You know, I don't think that any of us, when we're, you know, falling in love and we're assuming that it's going to go beautifully and be our happily ever after, I certainly know that none of us, when we're walking down the aisle to pledge our devotion to one person, ever thinks that we're going to find our way to the wrong side of that 50% divorce divide. And yet it happens, and it happened to me, and I was kind of taken out by surprise after a decade of marriage. And I was, of course, the added complexity for me is that I was also a teacher of love and relationships. So I think, you know,
So you felt like a fraud?
I felt embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I felt frightened about what that message was for people. And, you know, in a way, thank God I did, because when I felt so ashamed and embarrassed, and when I took off my wedding ring, I remember the feeling like a little bit like, oh, I'm I've gone down a notch in society's eyes, right? Which I think, because I think culturally we devalue being single. So there was a lot that I was going through, but thank goodness I know to look at my own personal experience and to globalize it and realize that it's not just me feeling this way, it's other people feeling this way too. So it made me curious about the happily ever after myth to which we are all collectively aspiring to. And I started to kind of research it a little bit. But just going back to your question,
Right.
because I could go off on that for a while, and I hope to, because it's really fascinating what I found. I think that, breakups are a crossroad, and nobody's going to stand still in a breakup. You're either going to live a diminished life in the aftermath of heartache because you can't trust your choices, you can't really fully trust other people. You're going to go into, love with your arms kind of crossed next time. You're a little bit more defended moving forward. And many people don't ever really let themselves fall in love again. I meet a lot of people who've been divorced for a decade and they haven't gone out on one date. And it just kind of, they just never really came around to it somehow. But if you really look at it, it's because on some level they're not open. They don't want to be hurt again. And they don't feel like they can trust themselves moving forward. If you can use the breakup and the heartache and the shattering and the embarrassment and all that you're going through to really grow and develop yourself, to let it catapult you to the next stage of your self-awareness and your capacity to love and be loved, that's what it is to turn the worst thing that ever happened into the best thing that ever happened to you.
You talk, Katherine, in the book, we all, I think, are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And I think her books really have helped people through losses. And breaking up is a loss as well. And you've divided this book into 5 stages. And just walk everybody kind of, and I just want to keep reiterating that this is, if you have a friend and you're, quote, breaking up with a lifelong friend, and that happens a lot to people, right? If you're in a work situation, you want to consciously uncouple at work. And also if you are separated or you, as I said, have a child. So I think, could you just kind of go through the 5 stages that bring you kind of to what you call emotional freedom?
Of course. Well, conscious uncoupling is kind of a blueprint for how to do this well, how to break up better. I think, inside, back to the happily ever after myth just for a second, I think inside of that myth, which, by the way, is only 400 years old and was created in Venice, Italy, by a gentleman, Giovanni Straparola or something.
Straparola. Okay.
Straparola.
Okay. Just Straparola. Edit. Okay.
And
we don't care about him.
Okay.
Let's just get to how do we get free.
Okay. But basically, happily ever after was created when the lifespan was less than 40. And when there were laws on the books in Venice, Italy, that prevented a commoner to marry a noble person. So if you were born into poverty, you were going to live and die in poverty. There was no way out. And so these escapist fantasies of upward mobility and where a commoner marries a nobler kind of took off and had then gone around the world and now become our standard and our expectation of what we want from our romantic unions. So conscious uncoupling, is really addressing, certainly not advocating for breakups and divorce, but addressing the fact that the reality is that very few of us in this lifetime are going to only have one partner. And that the studies indicate that we're more likely to have 2 or 3 significant major relationships in our lifetime. So my feeling is like inside of that happily ever after myth, we feel ashamed, we feel a relationship has failed. And so we haven't learned how to do this well.
So how do we do it well? What are the 5 steps?
First step is find emotional freedom, which is how do we deal with those incredible, big emotions that are washing through us. Nature has kind of hardwired us for connection and relatedness. And so when we lose an attachment, we call it a rupture of attachment, a breakup. When we lose an attachment, we get deregulated. We can go into fight or flight. We feel like we're going to die. The longing for someone becomes more acute because the part of the brain that gets activated during a rejection is the same part of the brain, believe it or not, that's activated when we're first falling in love. So our longing is increased.
So I think what's also interesting about Catherine's book is you kind of you talk a lot about brain science. You talk a lot about attachment. You talk a lot about taking responsibility. And attachment, as we've come to learn, I think anybody who's learned about mothering, attachment starts very early on. You also ask people to look at their own lives and where attachment might have been broken early on,
Right.
way before you're in the situation you're in.
Right. Well, there's two kinds of suffering, and one we can't spare ourselves from. That's the normal grief of letting someone go, and that's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. However, there's a second kind of suffering that happens in a breakup, and it's very acute, and it has to do with the meaning that we're making of the breakup, about ourselves and about the possibility of love in our future. And so conscious uncoupling also provides, so that's step 3 of the process.
Okay,
so
so
step 1 is turning those big emotions in from a destructive, impulse to hurt, lash out, get revenge, and harnessing the energy as the energy for positive change in our lives.
Number 2, what's number 2?
That's reclaiming our power and our life, which has to do with taking personal responsibility, looking at our side of things. When we're in a breakup, particularly if we've been left or someone has behaved badly, which people often do at the end of love, it's very easy to become obsessed with the other person and to really become obsessed with our victimized perspective, which is probably accurate. We probably were treated badly. We're not that crazy. We're not making it up. And, we're so, human beings so need fairness and justice that if there's been an injustice, we can get very obsessed with the injustice. However, even if the other person is 97% at fault, I tell people you've got to look at your 3%. Even if that was passive, you were silent when you should have spoken up. You dismissed your own knowing. You minimized the red flags. You have a habit of lying to yourself. All of those kind of internal passive ways that we betray ourselves. And then you've got to learn how to identify what those are and make an amends moving forward to never behave this way again. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to trust yourself to love again. This is where people dim down their chances of love in the future, is in not taking personal responsibility, in not looking at our part. So even though it's very tempting to keep our focus there, we want to focus on ourselves and give up the shame and blame game. Where people would get snagged on that is if you go to look at yourself as the source, excuse me, very often we'll go into shame.
Right.
We'll ask ourselves questions like, what is wrong with me?
Right.
How come nobody loves me? Why did I keep doing stupid things? Like, we ask ourselves questions that are never going to promote growth. So
I think women actually end up doing that a lot, not just personally, but also professionally. What is wrong with me? Why am I not climbing up that ladder? Why can I not do what the woman sitting next to me can do? We're constantly, I think, in that space. That woman's a better mother than me. That person's a better worker than me. I can't do this. What's up with that?
I think that it's a skill.
Yeah.
I think self-reflection is actually a skill, and I teach it. I call it empowered self-reflection, and it's learning how to ask ourselves that are not shame-based. And very often, why questions are shame-based.
So is there
Why
a
do
question
you
that
do
each person in this room could start the
Yes.
day with that would set you off on the right trajectory?
How have I been giving my power away, and what could I do to reclaim it? That would be one question that would be growth-oriented. If you're being treated poorly by someone, is there any way that I'm treating myself poorly that somehow has given permission to another person to treat me badly too? Is there any way that I'm training people to treat me badly in how I treat myself? See, these are kinds of questions that are going to foster development and promote growth and allow us to trust ourselves to begin showing up differently in life in a way that's going to create a different experience.
So 4 and 5, and obviously I'm trying to clip through these to make this a bigger conversation because she lays them out very specifically.
Right, so the step 3 is breaking that pattern of repetition that happens and graduating from it. Step 4, this is where we really wake up to our power to create a positive future, no matter how dismal things have been in the past. And the first thing we want to start to do is to kind of disappear the toxic emotions that are living between you and another person. You know, if someone has betrayed you and you've learned how to be polite, but there's still all that toxic residue and that tension in the field when you see them, which is very, very bad for children, by the way. Or the resentment that we might be living with, which can fester actually for years in the aftermath of a bad breakup, where you find yourself driving down the freeway and telling him off even though you haven't talked to him in 4 years. Yeah. You know, but that's bad for our health. You know, studies show that that's as bad for our health as if we're chronic smokers. It leaves us 20% more susceptible to heart disease. It's very, very bad for our lives.
One of the things I think that we've become to learn quite a bit about trauma. We hear a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder now, and it's not just something that happens to people who've gone off to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you talk really about an uncoupling as a trauma. Yes. And everything that I've learned also is that trauma stays in your body. And I was speaking with a meditation teacher who said to me, one of the most important things you could do with your website and with your voice is to tell people that meditation actually is a way to release trauma, and it's one of the most socially conscious things we as a country can do, because people are walking around, driving around, running companies with trauma, and they are leading from a traumatic space. They are parenting from a traumatic space. They are leading companies from it. They are running for president from a traumatic space, and what comes out is, you know, trauma. It's just spewing all over the place. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with it. I actually was just on the phone yesterday with Dr. Peter Levine, who's considered one of the world's foremost experts in trauma, and we were talking about the conscious uncoupling process as it relates to his work in trauma release. And there is a component in the work that I do that's very compatible with that, because it is in the body. And so a lot of us are trying to change our beliefs just on a mental level.
Right.
And you actually can't, because the beliefs actually live in the body like almost a field. And the image that I have is, remember that character Pigpen in Peanuts? And he would walk around in a cloud. You don't remember that cartoon? Yeah. Well, he would walk. How many of you remember that?
Cartoon,
right?
But I wasn't a big Peanuts.
Okay, so there was a character named Pigpen, and he literally walked around in a cloud of dust, followed him everywhere. But that's how our beliefs are. And you know how when somebody walks into a room, and you can kind of know if that person, without ever talking to them, has a sense that the universe is a friendly place or the universe is a hostile place. So the universe is a hostile place is unprocessed trauma in the body. So it's really outside of conscious awareness. So I have a practice that I could invite everyone to do, is that when you are feeling disappointed or hurt by a repetitive pattern that keeps showing up over and over, is to pause and drop your awareness and notice where that upset is in your body, and even talk to that part of you. And ask it, what's the meaning you're making of this? What's the I am or I am not? And it's going to be I'm not good enough, or no one wants me, or I'm not loved, I'm not, I'm alone in life. There's some inner conversation, and it's literally in the body. So the meditation piece is the developing the observer part of us, which can then, step back and look at that part, extend love to that part of ourselves. And it's usually a younger part of the self that, was making erroneous meaning out of what was happening. Mom was an alcoholic, and the 4-year-old couldn't say, gee, my mom needs AA. Let's see if we can get her some support. The 4-year-old's going to say, I must not be important. Right? So we lodge these conversations in the body, so you can send love to that part of yourself, and then you can say, sweetheart, what's really true about that is this, is that you're deeply loved by all of life. You're not alone. I'm right here with you, right? So, but we have to deal with it in the body. It's not just a cognitive process.
What is the idea that you're deeply loved? I have 2 daughters, and they're in their early 20s, and there's a lot of young women around my house, and everybody is obsessed with love. What is it? What is it not? Who's in it? Who's not? Why am I not? Why is she? What's up? That's dysfunctional. No, it's not. She is. He's not. And Katherine and I were talking about like, and I just kind of listened to these conversations. You don't know what you're talking about. It's different in our generation. Be quiet. And so this idea of love, what is love? What are we supposed to be teaching the young people that we know? What are we supposed to be teaching ourselves? What are we supposed to be teaching our partners, our sons? What is this thing called
Well,
love?
so you're talking about two different kinds of love. So there's the unconditional, like I'm loved by all of life, which you could sit there and, that's a place to be anchored in consciousness. Like, wait a minute, the moment I feel like I'm not loved, how many ways has life been loving me today? Well, let's start with the fact that I'm in America and I have food to eat this morning, and I'm not worried about, feeding my daughter. But what you're talking about are the relational dynamics of love. And that old saying, love is unconditional, but relationships are not. And so we're learning a lot about how to be in relationship with each other, not just to stay with each other over time, but to be able to realize the higher potentials that each relationship holds for co-creativity and for true care and for true support. I think and I said before, anyone born at this time is an architect of change. We are all called right now to begin to actualize our potentials. And the truth is that we can only do that in relationship with each other. We can't actualize our potentials in isolation. We need each other to realize our full potential. So how do we be in relationship in a way that is supportive, in a way that's honoring, in a way that's respectful, that has good boundaries where we can differentiate. Maria's a different person. She has her own set of beliefs. She has her own agendas. She has her own needs. Catherine's got her own needs. And how do we actually be in relationship in a way where we're not necessarily going to, slide into codependence to express care? We're going to respect each other. We're going to honor each other. We're going to support each other. And a lot of that, I really believe it comes down to we're being called to develop a lot of inner awareness. We used the word before when we were talking interiority.
Yes, she's talking to me about interiority. I'm like, well, what's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interiority is an awareness of our own inner state at any given time, our emotional literacy about what's going on, and awareness of our motives, because very often we have mixed motives. Even when we're giving to get something. We want to be safe, we want to be accepted, we want to be liked, we want someone else not to leave us. Just the self, that's human, by the way.
And I think another thing that Katherine was talking about in the book, or is talking about, is naming those things, not attaching shame to them, but naming your feelings and giving emphasis, I think, to emotional literacy. We were talking earlier, I was saying, I don't think many of the people here probably grew up with an emphasis on emotional literacy. Emotional intelligence is something kind of new that we're hearing about. So there's an entire world out there of emotional literacy. And we've been doing a lot of men's groups here, and the men come in and say, like, my wife or my partner expects me to be emotionally literate. I have no idea what she's talking about. I don't have the language. No one taught it to me. They don't teach it in business school. What is it? What is it? Because really that is, I think, fundamentally how we consciously uncouple, how we consciously lead, how we consciously parent, how we consciously, work with people. Yeah. And that is the only way, I think, that we can move our country and our communities and our lives forward, is if we have a new language with which to articulate ourselves and our feelings.
And in step one of the things that I talk about in step one, because those emotions are so big that we can have and can cause us to really act out in very destructive ways. So one of the things practices that I give people is what psychologists call affect labeling. And it's the simple practice of just taking a deep breath and asking yourself, Katherine, honey, what are you feeling right now? And letting yourself answer specifically a feeling. Not like, oh, I feel like he's being a jerk, right? That's not a feeling, that's a thought, right? So I feel embarrassed, I feel violated, I feel hurt, I feel lovesick, I feel despair, I feel enraged. And just mirroring it back, I can see that you're feeling that. What else are you feeling right now?
Because how do you not feel weird doing that?
Well, but this is the thing. So studies have shown, there was a study done at UCLA where images came onto a computer screen of faces that were, expressing horror and pain and just nightmare kind of expressions. And they were monitoring the heart rate and the pulse, the temperature and all that of people, and it was going through the roof. Like people's blood pressure was rising, their hearts were pounding. The moment that they put a name on it, sorrow, despair, horror, terror, fear, all the stats went down. Because it's a matter of, do we have our emotions or do our emotions have us? We're dangerous when our emotions have us. But when we have our emotions, it means that, they're big feelings, but we are in the driver's seat of our lives. We have conscious choice. We can make decisions, and certainly when you're in the middle of a breakup, we want to remember that every action you take, every decision that you make, you're going to be living with the consequences of those for many years to come, you and your children. So it's critical for us to have command over what's happening inside of us, in these moments, but in any moment of our life that matters, really.
What is the fifth step of the program?
The fifth step, and I think this is one of the things that makes conscious uncoupling a little bit unique, rather than just because, there's some good, wonderful teachers that have been helping us to grow ourselves healthier during a breakup. But one of the ethics of conscious uncoupling is that relationships don't just belong to the two people in them, they actually belong to the whole community. So it's not just a structure of well-being for the family even, but it's it's for the community, the children. Other people are impacted by that. We hear about the pillars of the community. The couple was the pillars of the community. So what happens when pillars of the community break up, or your aunt and uncle break up, or your neighbors break up, is that it starts to feel unstable everywhere for everyone. And people feel pulled on like they have to go to war now, and they feel confused about how to respond. So conscious uncoupling is really inside of the ethic of, creating wellness for the individual, but wellness for the community and wellness for the world. So it includes how to tell people, and it includes, the ethic of not pulling on people to choose sides. And we even have conscious uncoupling rituals that I offer to people, where people can do a kind of ritual, and sometimes people invite their friends and family who've been a part of the relationship to come and to witness their unmarriage ceremony or their breakup ceremony. And these are incredibly beautiful experiences, in some ways more beautiful than weddings.
Now, when this kind of phrase became part of the culture, when Gwyneth Paltrow used it, and then she since has said, well, I never even had heard of it. Somebody at my company put the name on that. But everybody kind of snickered when they were like, what is that? What is that? And I know you said you've never met her, and you yourself found out about it through the media that this had been used. And how do people still kind of snicker, or do you feel that society in general is moving in this direction and giving the weight that term and what you're writing about really deserves? Because what you're really saying that this is, which is what I like about this book, is that you're saying this is important for you first and foremost, for you and your partner second, for your family, for the community, right? And really ultimately for the world we live in, because all of our actions have effect, right?
They do. I just thought it was such a blessing, first of all, from the universe. Because we could go around the room, and so many people here have projects and things of merit that they want to bring out into the world. And I was having the feeling of being like 28 months pregnant with conscious uncoupling. And I'd had about 1,000 people through the online program, and but I didn't know how it was going to happen and how I was going to somehow get this into the universe. And then the celebrity gods graced me with this incredible, opportunity. And as many people snickered, also people heard it, because the very language of conscious uncoupling opens up a new possibility for how we might begin to do this better. And, in the 1960s, divorce is kind of a new conversation. I mean, obviously, since the beginning of time, people have been separating in divorces. That's not new. But in America, you could not get a divorce without blaming, shaming, going to court before a judge, talking about the horrible things that the other person did, until 1969, when Reagan signed the no-fault divorce law into being in California. So it started here. It was adopted slowly across the nation. New York was the last state to adopt it, I think, in 2010. New York, believe it or not. So, inside of that, we never really learned how to do that. The roots of divorce are antagonistic and hostile. We never really learned how to do that well. And so conscious uncoupling, I'm hoping, is, leading the way on really the second divorce revolution. It is an idea whose time has come, though. And so as much as people were mocking her and laughing at her, it was also in the dictionary within 24 hours to redefine divorce and a new possibility. So it's been a little bit of a double-edged sword, and I think more and more people have come around. And I have to tell you, the press was the one who saved the day, because immediately they found me. I was on a writing retreat working on the Conscious Uncoupling book proposal when this broke. I was in Costa Rica in some obscure yoga retreat center, and my emails started to flood. And so within days, I was in New York on the Today Show, and the New York Times had done a feature story on it. And
do you find one of the things that this is kind of after the 5 steps that you write about in this book, about expectations being really the root of all inner turmoil, all problems, all chaos? And I had read a really interesting piece by David Brooks in the New York Times about expectation. And when he went to a certain kind of hotel, he had these kind of expectations when he walked in the room. So when his coffee maker didn't work in the Four Seasons, he went ballistic. And when he walked into a courtyard and there was a coffee maker, he was like, oh, wow, I'm so grateful to have a coffee maker. And if it didn't work, he's like, oh, okay, it's the courtyard. And how our expectations really about whatever it is, what we expect every day, end up hurting us, and that no more so in love, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that coffee maker, the hotel, what we expect when we walk into this place, or what we expect from this person, and we cut someone else a completely different road because we don't expect that from them. So talk a little bit about expectations, because I think that's something that, whether it's expectations in love, expectations of ourselves, expectations of a partner, our children.
Yeah. Well, I think, this is why it was really important to start to deconstruct happily ever after, because we really are all walking around in the expectation of happily ever after. And so in the aftermath, if something doesn't work out, we automatically go into shame and failure conversation. So I'm asking us to consider, as we're updating our computer programs and our diets and our child rearing practices and, how we exercise according to the new, stats that are coming in, the new knowledge that's coming in, that we kind of be willing to set aside these expectations, and that are really actually unrealistic for the majority of us, who are now, there was a recent cover on Time magazine that said the babies born today might live to 150 years old, right? So, I wrote in the book, can you imagine when, the 50th wedding anniversary is just young love, the blush of love.
Yeah.
Right. So what are our expectations? We need a new set of expectations. And and also I think that one of the things that causes long suffering in people who don't ever really get over a breakup, certainly people who have to run into their former partner all the time, has to do with the expectations that were really part of the marriage, that were appropriate in the marriage, but they have never been renegotiated. And we can hold on to those. So part of step 5 is also looking at the agreements that the relationship was founded upon, like, you will always be the most important person to me, I will always love you and no one else, you will be my only lover, these kinds of expectations that created the marriage, and that you have to actually make them conscious. Some of them were covert and some are overt, but you have to make all of them conscious and renegotiate them so that your expectations are in alignment with reality, because studies do show that when our expectations are not met, our cortisol levels go through the roof. We feel stressed out and we get unhappy. And that when they are met, that we have a sense of well-being, that the world feels safe and good and wholesome.
What is the one thing that you think might make their lives, our lives, which in fact I really do believe our communities and our world a better place. What's your building block?
Oh, I love it. Well, I know each and every one of us has gifts inside of us. We have greatness inside of us, like that has never been brought forward in the way that we ourselves could bring it forward. And very often, our impulse to be change agents will begin with a complaint. The things that we don't like, that we see are not working, that upset us terribly. And I want to invite all of us to turn the complaint into a commitment. And if it's occurring for you as something is wrong and unjust, to see yourself as the one and to begin to authorize yourself and to take yourself seriously. Life is not going to, like peace is not going to descend upon the world. It's only going to happen through us. And so a lot of times we value our minds over our guts, and we'll talk ourselves out of things. And when we do that, you know what happens? We feel depressed, and we feel anxious, and we feel just a little bit off course. So I love, there was a poet named Louise Bogan, and she said that no woman should be shamefaced within her work to restore to the world a portion of its lost heart. And I think that each of us in our own way, whether professionally or just how we're walking through life, is being called to restore to the world a portion of its lost heart.